We have an amazing guest to bring on today. He is 6'5", rugby athlete, a behemoth of a man, and he's got one of the most Canadian-sounding names I've heard in a while. It is Breandan Hamilton. How you do, Breandan?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's like the most proper Irish Scottish name you can possibly have. But it also works for my Métis heritage, so I'm happy with that.
I think to kick things off, we'd like to get a little bit of your backstory and the kind of person you are. And I know that's kind of a moving target with many of us that are on this path of changing and growing and becoming who we are. That's never something that's static. But one thing that you did mention in another podcast interview was how you were a sensitive and creative kid, which is something I related to a lot. And I'd love for you to elaborate on how that felt, what that was like.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So I actually had my final sculpture critique today for the year. And one of the quotes I used was from E. Cummings. There's an amazing children's book. It's called Enormous Smallness that goes over a lot of his work in his life. And the quote is, "It takes great courage to grow up and become who you are." So I think if I really had to summarize my journey, that's a big part of it. Growing up, really young, sensitive kid, loved singing, loved dance, but was also very, very athletic. And just the way my family unit was structured and the way I think it is for a lot of young boys, you're not going to fit in too well if you sing and dance and are artsy. But if you're really good at sports, you're going to get picked first. You're going to have a lot of acceptance. So that was a big part of my identity growing up, was playing sports and being athletic. But to the detriment of connecting with these parts of myself that I think are really, really core to who I am, my expressive side, my sensitive side, being able to be vulnerable, connect with feelings, all these things. And so I went through life with, I would say, a lot of armor and a pretty big facade. I developed a lot of personas to figure out how to get attention or what would get respect within culture. Through contact sports, like you said, rugby. It's like, hey man, you're a big guy. Like if you can get out on the field and you can crush other people, which much as I really enjoyed it, that's kind of where you gain respect. And so as I became an adult, I had this idea that I wasn't artistic whatsoever, but I went through a lot of formative experiences that started to slowly peel back those layers. Whether it be the end of romantic relationships or just going through bouts of depression or feeling like I'm not having much direction or meaning. And I would say through a lot of counseling, through a lot of inner exploration, through very cautious and responsible engagement with psychedelic assisted therapy, I've probably spent the last 7 or 8 years reconnecting with the core of who I believe I really am. And it's quite a gentle, patient, creative human being who just kind of wants to create beauty in the world and figuring out what my gifts are and how those can be of purpose to serve my community. I mentioned at the very beginning Métis heritage, and so a large part of the way I view the world is through not only, I would say, a Native American lens, but just an indigenous lens in general, looking at a lot of similarities globally is how does your life contribute to the village? That's kind of how we're meant to live. I think the happiest people on earth have a really deep sense of community. And so that's what I try and focus on now is how do I live a life that's really purposeful in service to my community? How do I deepen relationships? And that really is kind of the fundamental thing is relationships are everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons we do what we do with Spark Infinity. I was athletic as well in the early going. I loved basketball, baseball, and soccer. I couldn't really choose between them. I was a soccer player for a while because I got on the soccer team and then pretty much shifted over to basketball as that seemed to be more, I had a knack for that. Repeated injury sort of informed me that it might not be the path forward. And I think there's an element to being an athlete that requires a really tough mindset as well. I mean, I grew up with that in Japan. We definitely had a militaristic mindset, if anything, about school and what that meant. It was a commitment. If you went to school, you didn't go to school to just go into classroom and learn a few subjects. There was also an element to it that if you were part of a club, there was a minimum of 1 or 2 hour commitment after school every day, sometimes all the way till after supper, like 7 or 8 p.m. So there's one thing I've heard about being athletic or just working out in general, doing things more with your body. In a way, you're thinking with your body versus your head. And so getting out of that, or at least finding a balance to that, if you're reading books or if you're resting or if you're going out and enjoying in nature, you actually get to be in your head more. And that differentiation really struck me as important. I'm wondering how that transition to creativity kind of happened for you.
Yeah. I actually really want to touch on that.
Mm,
I will say like one thing that a background in athletics really did form within me, especially I was into extreme sports, is like a willingness to just push yourself. And I feel very blessed that playing high level athletics was I was able to transition that mentality. Like if you're going to be an artist, push yourself. You know, if you're doing extreme sports, you fall down and you get up over and over and over again and you slam until you make something. And I think being an artist, that sense of resilience is really important. And then I would actually say like as much as I had great body awareness, I wasn't in my body playing sports.
mm,
I was very disconnected. I had to like shut off feelings, sensations, everything like that. I was very much in my head. And so my journey has actually been like reconnecting with the body, reconnecting with intuition, reconnecting with emotions, even just like learning what a healthy expression of anger is and not letting people walk all over me. And so as I've been able to connect with my body, um, it's actually like unlocked more creativity. And I now have I would say like a greater discernment, which is a kind of combination between this beautiful mind that we have, this meaning making pattern recognition with this ability to like connect with my art in a very visceral sense and to actually like, feel like I'm connected and I'm a part of it.
so when you say people who are walking over you, is that kind of like I had experience of being a people pleaser as
Yeah.
well? Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah. So, you know, an analogy would be like you take a baby elephant and you tie a stake around its leg and you put that in the ground and it can't get away. And as the baby elephant grows older, you know, it's more than capable. It's this giant, huge, strong animal of ripping it out of the ground. But its conditioning has been such that it still holds on to the mentality that like it can't. Um, and you know, being a very sensitive kid, just in the environments I was, you know, there's a lot of bullying going on.
Mm,
In my family unit, there was a lot of like, what you want doesn't matter. And so, as an adult, being able to actually learn to advocate for myself and not repeatedly put myself in relationships or situations where because I'm used to people treating me poorly, that's just like feels normal. And when you know, when I feel anger, it's like, man, I gotta get control of this anger. Why am I angry all the time? And it's like, well, you're angry because people are treating you like shit. And maybe you just need to like very politely tell people to fuck off every once in a while and like know that you're kind of a sovereign human being. So that's been part of my journey, and it's, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing, right? Like I'm a big guy, but there's a lot of big people that walk around with their heads down, you know.
mhm.
So learning to just like have a sense of self esteem and self advocacy has been a big part, and it's kind of nice now that I'm doing that. Like I'm a very gentle person, and so as much as I do Muay Thai and other stuff now just as an outlet, um, I want to be a protective force in the world, you know. I want to use my size or my strength as a way to actually like bring gentleness and bring harmony. Um, One of the ways I do that, I spend time with a lot of kids, just like their inherent creative spirit, their view of the world is just absolutely beautiful. And being able to, with my nieces, nephews, stuff like that, just like have this strength and use that to wrestle them, but also like give them the biggest hugs ever. That's kind of how I want to move through the world. So
Mm. Bullying is something I've certainly encountered quite a bit. And having it in a family dynamic sounds like a whole other thing, though. That sounds like a path unto itself. And I don't know if I'd be sufficiently prepared for something like that. What I will say is, like, I did some deep inner work with a coach this year because those bully energies were sticking around just in different ways. They manifested through coworkers and partners and other people I was providing content to for a long time. And as we worked through that, that broke off. Those bullying energies left, and abundance was allowed to come in, and it was really incredible. But it's sometimes tough when the bullying is external, yet what you have to deal with is something internal. Such a paradox.
yeah, it's really tough, right? And um, as passionate as I'm about art, kind of one of the other main passions of mine is just psychology, coaching, things like that.
Mm,
And what I've learned about brain development is for kind of the first 7 8 years of a kid's life, like if you're growing up in an environment um, with your caretakers, anytime something's wrong or they're upset, you don't have the cognitive ability to recognize like, oh, they're upset at something else. This isn't me. It's always about you. And so we can build these operating systems or these beliefs that like I'm bad. And the vast majority of people they live their lives until the day they die, like running on operating systems that were formed in their childhood. And so like what you talking about, I've been doing something called like parts work through a modality called internal family systems. I'm like learning about different parts or different belief systems that I can tend to from this mature place and update that so that I'm no longer limited by that. Yeah. And that's like, as cliche as trite as this, hurting people hurt people. So I kind of understand why people in my life treated me the way I did, because they had a sense of powerlessness or they didn't deal with their own shit. And that's like, I think one of the beautiful things of living in the age we are now is with the digital age, we have so much access to information to work on ourselves and work on the things we need to work on. There's just so many tools, and I've found it's a very virtuous cycle. The more you seek those things out, the more you meet people who are, I think, on a similar journey of healing or maturation, as I would call it, just like maturing and deepening as a human being and kind of developing more intimate comprehension with yourself. And you start to attract people and you share. And I think creatives are a very, very tapped in community for that. I've just met so many beautiful souls who are like on this journey. And the more you do it, I mean, the more creativity you unleash, the more, like you said, you attract like abundance in terms of relationships into your life.
Yeah. I've done quite a bit of personal development work, and that's also very true of the Spark Infinity team. So we definitely have a frame of reference. The distinctions are called something different than they would be in psychology, but what you described, we would call like a winning formula. Okay. It's not winning as in, it's good for me. It's just a way to survive and get through life. We might also call that a point of view, right? You can change our point of view, but we kind of, because of what happened to us in life, we're stuck in that point of view more often than not, and we're coming from that place. So yeah, we all have a good frame of reference for what you're saying there about psychology. One thing I want to ask about too is this whole thing about network marketing. I got into it myself. That's where my awareness of financial freedom and the opportunity kind of grew. And since then, like I've certainly adopted the identity, or felt more aligned with the identity of a self-employed or freelancer or entrepreneur. And that's the direction I've taken my life in. But what did you get out of network marketing, and how did you get into that?
I honestly try and forget a lot of it, but I'll share a little bit of the journey. I was in university. I was taking kinesiology, and I was en route to becoming a teacher. And as I started doing my teaching practicums, I started to see what 30 to 40 years in what I would call the industrial school system looks like. And it was very depressing. There's a great book called Weapons of Mass Instruction, or another great book, Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. It touches on the roots of what I would call the industrial school system. And I was like, I don't particularly feel like I want to be a part of this. I feel like I'm going to go insane. And I was in my early 20s and was approached by a close friend, and was said, hey man, like, what do you want to do in life? I said, well, I want to be a husband and a father. That's kind of like my main thing. And he said, well, I'm connected with some people who, that's what they do. They build financial freedom. They help people do that. And so over the course of kind of the next 4 or 5 years, I would say the things I really got out of that was, I sold all my video games, started reading books voraciously. So that really got me into personal development. Started getting into personal development podcasts. I was working at a nightclub at the time. I was actually running ladies' night for Cowboys nightclub in Calgary. And, as much as I learned a lot from those experiences and had a lot of good times, I started to see that there were conflict with the values I was trying to develop. I saw people who had good marriages and had a certain sense of integrity. I saw people who had a foundation of faith in their lives, or spirituality that was really meaningful towards them. I started to think more entrepreneurially. And so those were all benefits, but ultimately, the way our particular system is structured, you had a mentor, and there's kind of a phrasing that I've taken on is, on the path to enlightenment, if you should happen to find the Buddha, be sure to kill him. And kind of, there's multiple ways to interpret that, but the way in which I've interpreted that is like, as a young man, and this is prior to me doing any counseling. So I would still they still really didn't have much clue of who I am. You come upon this man who very confident, seems like he has answers, embodies a lot of qualities you want. And it's like, man, this guy's the Buddha. He's got it all figured out. But as I started to do counseling, and specifically I started out with a modality called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, I started to strip away some of these layers and some of these personas to be like, dude, all you want to do is go to art galleries, and you were a metalhead and you had long hair most of your life and you've got tattoos and you haven't been going to shows. And I started to see that, this human being who I thought had all the answers didn't. And in fact, was kind of like stunted in their development. There was a lot of pride and a lot of hubris. And as well, within that organization, I just started to see a lot of groupthink. Not a cult, but like we all think the same. And any thinking outside of this isn't, it's not encouraged. Like, don't read books that aren't on our approved book list. And I was listening to podcasts like the Tim Ferriss show where I was like, man, there's so many people who have such fascinating career paths and seem to be doing such interesting things. And I started to realize the compensation system of the organization was irresponsible. There were only so many people who were, as driven as they could be and had, I would say, like the personality or the qualifications to kind of make it to a higher level. I started learning about ulterior financial systems like crypto and just seeing that it wasn't really financially responsible. And my business partner and I, who had kind of like gotten me involved, him and I both got really depressed. And same kind of thing. He had long hair most of his life, full tattoos, and we both quit. And he like went headlong into photography, built out a camper van all on his own. I started looking into architecture, going to different exhibitions, and we just kind of like, we were free and we started to flourish a little bit. So, there were a lot of positive things that I got out of network marketing and the particular organization that I was involved in. But ultimately, it's like, I just found it was based on conformity. And for like somebody who's very expressive and very creative, it was literally crushing my soul by the time I left. So, I look at it as a learning experience, but ultimately I've like moved on to, I would say, charting my own path. And I think like as a creative person, that's another challenge. Like I said, I'm not a fan of the school system, is like, it's not cookie cutter. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of just like following tracks and seeing where they lead and things not panning out and being able to like flow. And that's a whole nother skill set in and of itself.
I share a lot of those experiences, and I think there were two things that ultimately sent me over the edge as far as network marketing was concerned. The first thing was I remember sitting at a weekend conference, a rally, and they asked the platinums and above to stand up. If you have a platinum business, you're probably making about $5,000 a month. In a room of about 600 to 800 people, about 10 people stood up. So then I thought to myself, to support those 10 platinum level businesses, you need 600 to 800 people. How many people do I need? And I understood that it's a business of duplication. Of course, I don't personally need to sponsor 200, 300 people, but I might have to be involved in every one of them. Is that something I'm willing to do? Mm-hmm. The other thing that sent me over the edge was reading the fine print that talked about, if you have another business, we own it. And I thought, oh my God, what did I get myself into? I don't understand legalese all that well, but best I can understand, they own anything you could possibly create for the next 10 years.
Wow.
So that was crazy. So we've gotten a sense of your character, the person that is Breandan. Now I'm wondering, like, what sort of things are you getting into creatively? What's your project right now?
So I'm currently a student at the Alberta University of the Arts. And I guess I would consider myself a bit of a multidisciplinary artist. So you can see one of my pieces in the background there. I've kind of got my own abstract, very simple illustration style. A lot of it was inspired by a gentleman named Alex Johnvier, who just passed away this year. Probably one of the greatest indigenous artists of all time. His stuff is just absolutely breathtaking. But at the moment, I've been very, very, very blessed to receive a couple artist grants. So the first project I'm going to be working on is a music video, and it's going to be juxtaposing contemporary indigenous dance. So trying to find artists who do hip hop or other forms with traditional fancy dance, and using it as kind of an expression or a platform to address how one of the mechanisms of killing indigenous culture was to suppress dance, to suppress song, to suppress music, and being able to just have a really kind of beautiful contemporary way of showcasing those artists and that form. The second grant I'm going to be working on is a project called The Lost Boys. I personally have been very, very passionate about men's work, understanding the difficulties that boys and men face in culture, in developing, and the damaging effects that has on them, but not only society as a whole. And pretty much everything that affects boys and men affects indigenous boys and men to an even greater extent. one of the easiest stats would be the highest percentage of homeless and incarcerated males in Canada are Indigenous men. Highest suicide rates, Indigenous boys and men. So I'm going to be looking at a lot of the issues that they're facing and doing interviews with certain people, hearing about their life stories, things they've had to overcome, and turning that into a digital kind of magazine. So that's something I'm working on. And then I kind of have my own personal practice as well. I just submitted some art to get a number of prints done. I've started making my own kind of greeting cards, things like that. Been working on just some different sculpture proposals, and I would also just say like music and dance are a big thing for me right now. So doing a lot of singing, doing a lot of movement practices, and I mean, like, overall, my moniker, which I kind of took from Bruce Lee, is to be an artist of life. He said, above all, I aim to actualize myself as an artist of life. So it's kind of like anything I do, I want to approach it as an art form, and to infuse it with what I would just say is like beauty. Beauty is kind of my highest ambition as an artist, and not just beauty in an aesthetic sense, but like beauty as in the belief creator made the world in a beautiful way. And so beauty as an expression of God and my connection to spirit, beauty as an expression of truth, beauty as an expression of serving, beauty as seeing the beauty in somebody's spirit. So it's not just an aesthetic thing to me, it is kind of like an all-encompassing life philosophy. I even have a tattoo on my ribs that says Ardua per Bellus, which is Latin for adversity through beauty. And that's, as far as I've been able to discern at this point, like the most beneficial operating system. And it's helped keep me out of a victim mindset or mentality, which is like, it doesn't matter what happens to you in life. Like, as difficult as things are, there's a learning experience in it. There's some benefit for you. And, we're all dealt a hand in life. And some of us are notably dealt a better hand than others. But we can still look for the benefits or the gifts that we have in the hand we're dealt, and like look to maximize it as best we can, and maybe to help other people as well. So that's like kind of artistically what I'm working on as well, but a bit of my artistic philosophy woven in with that to cap it off.
Hey, Breandan, I finally got my sound fixed. So yeah,
sweet.
Great to have you. I had a question because I mean, this is a topic that's, I think, so many people are focusing on Indigenous rights and affects art and culture that way. I think there's like what I'm left with like is I don't ever want this to come off, but I'm a very free spoken, I guess, human being, and it's like having that free speech is a challenge sometimes, because it's like I don't mean to be crass or anything. It's just like what my mind goes to is like, what do we have in the world when there's more of these people? Because it just seems like such a expanse in the communities these days, like, and the problem just keeps worsening. Like, we're not getting a lot of clarity to things. So it's like I see a lot of pitching, or like we saw a really great Indigenous DJ and had that format. He was into hip hop. He had dancers on stage, and it was really great at Canada Day. And it's like, this whole cultural appropriation. I mean, living in BC, I just saw the Indigenous communities, as I've read about it in history, being so, like you said, held back. And I mean, I've had skateboarding friends and people in my life that have come and gone. I grew up in Kamloops, so there was a reserve that unfortunately didn't flourish a lot of the time. And I just see it as like there's so much opportunity for Indigenous peoples, but how do we really empower them to become a nation of prosperity without adding to the problem? I think that's, and I just am like, you seem so passionate, and there's like a lot of that, but getting out of the out of the conceptual side of it and into the actual impact on society. Is it a small impact, medium impact, or large impact? I don't know how you can interpret that, but it's like, I'm trying not to like upset anyone. And I think that's the hardest thing, is like, I'm just an honest dude trying to live life, and I appreciate all peoples. So it's like, how do you step in the world without getting canceled all the time?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think there's a couple threads I can discern. I mean, the first thing I would say is we don't have free speech in Canada.
Maybe that's it.
That's it. We don't. We legally don't have free. Yeah, we legally don't have free speech in Canada. I'm of the opinion, like, I don't think you should allow. I don't personally condone hate speech, but
no.
And everything you said, I take zero offense to that. I think the first thing I would outline is something I've taken from my elders is to preface, like, I want to use my language as accurately as I can, but I can only speak to the extent of my understanding.
Yeah.
And in that way, like, I don't have all the answers. The other thing I would say is I in no way speak for all Indigenous people whatsoever. I speak for myself and my understanding. And I know a lot of people are afraid of saying the wrong thing or getting canceled and doing all that. I'm not really a proponent. Like, if you're genuinely being curious and you're asking questions, this would be another one of my elders. Like, everyone is on the process of maturation. And when people's words or actions demonstrate that there's just more for them to learn, why would you ever belittle them? Like, why would you put them down? Why wouldn't you just encourage them and embrace them, knowing that like they genuinely would do better if they could? So that's another thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with what you said. The way I would approach this is, it is an insanely complex issue. Insanely. I was at a course at the Banff Center for the Arts in Indigenous Strategic Thinking, and I had somebody who asked me the same thing. And I think my answer was like, I think everyone's just got to start with themselves. They got to be the change they want to see in the world. This might be a very controversial statement, but it's a quote that I heard and I kind of live by, as like, part of the mechanics of oppression are to pervert one's perspective such to the extent that they become the instrument of their own oppression. And I unfortunately think one of the effects of colonization, of the residential school system, of generational trauma, is that a lot of these communities have lost touch with their cultural teachings, with ceremony, with the inherent strength and beauty that they had. And it's incredibly diverse. I mean, from across the country, east to west coast, even within the Salish territories, right out in BC, there's such a diversity in terms of all these teachings that everyone has, and they've lost connection to that. And in a lot of ways, they've become the instrument of their own oppression. You know, I mentioned it earlier. It's the elephant with the rope tied around its leg. And I don't know how to fix that.
No, I think
zero clue.
To chime in, I guess it's not about fixing it. It's about, like you said, it's starting with self and then injecting the beauty that you have, not trying to fix it. I think that's where a lot of people come from, is they try to fix it. Because I could go into like a reservation and like bring all the fixes, you know, but if they didn't create it themselves, they're not going to have any pride in that. So the thing is like, I just sometimes wonder, because you're saying those things that I'm really touching base on, is like being kind of a victim in your own story in some aspects, whereas we have a chance to be a part of society and contribute as well, like in any sort. And I don't know, because I'm not Indigenous. I mean, like I said, this is a very touchy subject for me to speak about because I'm not Indigenous, but it's like I have lived on the outskirts of communities, or traveled and been in very remote places in the world. But other than that, like I know so little. And it's just so sad to me that it has to, like you said, it almost breeds inside their own communities too, where they're not thriving or intermingling sometimes with community outside of it. Like I live in an area on Vancouver Island, right, where there's a large reservation, and a lot of the time it's just like, I just want to see them thrive. Like, and I hear about this, like people don't have fresh water and things like that. And I'm like, why can't we just work together as peoples to like provide for each other what we need? That's more my heart. My goal is like that part of beauty. So that's where I'm coming from, is like, I want you to thrive, but I did it in, my own life with family or friends where I've like tried to support them, but in turn it was selfish. And then it became about me giving to them and seeing if that would fix their scenario. And it actually disempowered them, and they became less like of what I thought they were going to be,
Yeah. Yeah. That's really beautiful. Actually, that's very moving. And I think what I take out of that is like pretty simple. It's a give a fish versus a teach a fish mentality.
Yeah.
And that's been the government solution, is like, if we just throw money at things, it'll fix it. And while financial resources are beneficial and are needed, it's giving the communities a sense of agency to like really, really thrive. And again, I wish I had a solution, but I don't. But I love what you're saying, is like it's trying to in a beautiful way serve our common man as best we can, but it's so complex. I mean, my heart absolutely breaks. I think I've had a pretty blessed life in a lot of ways with the hand I've been dealt, and the elders that I meet, or some of the students I go to school with, and I hear their stories, and I hear the trauma that they've been through. If anybody watching this wants a little bit of an insight, there's a great film on Netflix called Indian Horse, which is a pretty gentle insight into some of what went on within the residential school system. And it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart, and it's a lot of work to undo. So
yeah, I mean, we can see it, right? So it's still happening. We're still just uncovering it still. And I mean, it just is that part, as like, when do we? as a community in the world or in our communities be able to interact and commingle with those nations and things like that so we can make a difference more together rather than having to be so separate. I mean, I even went on a reserve by accident. I went up, there's this beautiful church in my area, and I drove up this road, just like take a picture of my motorbike, and I got like shooed off, like, get out of here, you're gonna get tickets, blah blah blah. I'm like, oh dude, like I have no disrespect whatsoever, but like I was literally like, they're gonna fight me, or like, you know. And it's like, how does this work? Like I'm not your enemy, like I'm your friend. Like,
Yeah.
if you have this, like, and everybody's commingling outside of that, and they take part, it's just such a, like, I'm trying to catch myself because I'm like, I'm gonna dig myself in a hole, right? And it sucks because I just want to support, you know what I mean? I just want them to know, like, I'm your friend, I'm not your enemy, and I'm like here to help you in any way that I can. Like even in the governmental side of putting money on things, well, why don't they put money into them having fresh water and communities that work? Like, why do they still have to have those types of issues? It just blows my mind.
Well, if I could give some framing, that's kind of how it all started, was people coming to them and saying, hey, we want to be your friends, we want to help you. So you can maybe see how, like, through somebody's lived experience, they're very, very wary of somebody else coming in again and saying, hey, now that my culture, and you're not directly responsible with this, Jody, so I'm not putting it on you, but like broadly speaking, their experience is, white people are coming in and we're saying we want to help you, and there were ulterior motives. And so now you have another generation of people who, like, genuinely probably do have hearts to help. But it's like, now that the other people who said they want to help you have kind of messed that up, we actually want to help. And in a lot of ways, it's quite patronizing, and it's doing the opposite of giving those communities agency and empowering them. So again, very, very complex things, you know?
Yeah, and I appreciate answering them straightforward. I mean, it's a great, it's really rad to like see it from the other side. And I feel more at peace, at least being able to bring it up and just like, you know, because there's 4 of us here. And there's a world out there that maybe doesn't know the questions that I'm sitting on, and maybe they have the same questions, and being able to communicate with them in a community of mixed races and feelings and emotion, be open that way, I think is really important. And the way that I see it from you, I'm like, oh yeah, I got to remember that, you know, and it's like, yeah, I could totally see how it would be that, you know, because they've been taken advantage of, and it's a tough one. Like, and I appreciate your point of view or perspective on it. It's really rad. So thank you.
Yeah. And like, I grew up in Calgary. In a lot of ways, I've had a pretty blessed life. I've had my own challenges, and so this has been a big journey of interacting with elders, like hearing people's stories and trying to have a rather broad perspective. But yeah, just like, I don't know, fundamentally trying to live as beautiful of a life as I can, and just like try and serve on other people. You know, help people heal in any way. Just like share my story. That's kind of like how I've approached it. And I mean, one thing I'm looking at doing is, once I'm done my degree, potentially a master's in art therapy out in Nelson, in an institute called the Kootenai Art Therapy Institute. And I think, I mean, if I had to focus on like 1 or 2 areas, I think one would be arts within Indigenous communities. I think arts and creativity is just inherently essential for the human soul and for healing, and it can be part of ceremony. And then the other part would be like conservation and stewardship, and just understand that, like, I think there's a lot of resources that they have that they could be very entrepreneurial with, and just like reestablishing connection to land would be really important. So those are like 2 passions of mine, or conservation. I did a season tree planting out in BC. And that like really sparked my passion for interest in like regenerative agriculture, watershed conservation, forestry management, things like that. So yeah.
I don't claim to have a deep understanding of the issue, but it's not just in Indigenous communities that there isn't fresh water available. They may have lesser quality water, but we don't have the best water either, as I understand it. There's debates going on in the States right now about fluoride in the water, right? And whether that's healthy or not. I'm not on either side. Everyone's taking sides on that. And as I understand it, fluoride in water, probably not a good idea. Nevertheless, I don't know. I don't know all the factors, but it seems like water is somewhat of a universal issue. However, it may be worse in indigenous communities.
Yeah, and I would say it's actually not an issue that I'm super well educated upon, so I'm probably going to refrain from going into it. I just would say, like, you know, Canada is one of the countries that has, I would say probably, other than maybe like Russia, the greatest freshwater stores on Earth.
Yeah, that's true.
And the fact that, like, people don't have that as a basic human right is it's kind of a little ridiculous to me.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's the same. That's I'm just like I can't wrap my head around it sometimes because there's like pipeline like piping water in or whatever from a spring or whatever it is, like whatever it takes. It just seems like a lot of it's greed and the inability or the to care really, like whether in any form or fashion.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with my friend the other day, which is a world that's head centered rather than heart centered. And I mean, like in a Western world, a very like Aristotelian, Socratic world, we revere the mind and the intellect over everything else, rather than also understanding like a heart-based connection. And if you're really coming from a heart-based place, it's very difficult to take advantage of others. Now, I also understand like there's so many concepts. Like you get in, I'm saying this from like a very Zen kind of place, but I understand there's tribalism that's inherent in groups and communities, and there's lots of factors that play in. But yeah, I would say that's kind of one of the other things is we don't live in a very heart-centered society. We have a lot of people who are just very disconnected from their bodies and are disconnected from a sense of community. If you go into any suburb, you probably drive into your garage and you probably don't know your neighbors on the other side of you very well. If you live in an apartment building, it's really strange to even try and talk to people who live near you. So I think just like a severance from community and how we're inherently supposed to live and thrive as human beings contributes to all of this. And there's other countries in the world that are just so much more communally focused or family focused. And I try to draw from them as much as I can, as well as the indigenous teachings that I've taken on. And that to me is like, as an artist, creating a beautiful life is this life of like thriving, deep relationships where you have different generations intermingling with each other and you see the value in that.
Our resident visual artist, Susanna, has some questions for you. So Susanna, what would you like to ask Breandan?
Yeah, thanks. Breandan, I was really touched with what you said. Like I really like the thriving, deep relationships and, coming from a heart-based place, and it's difficult to take advantage of others. One of the things that I just picked out from what you were speaking about was like, how did you deal with the people saying what you want doesn't matter? Like I when you actually said that, I got triggered and I got hooked, and I'm just like wondering, like, how did you deal with that when then they actually told you that?
Well, we'll go back a bit, Susanna, and thank you for that question. I was a child. So when a child's told what you want doesn't matter, especially when they're like much bigger than you, I think you just like, you internalize that and you take that on as a belief. Like, okay, well, like time and time again, what I want doesn't matter. And the emotions, whether it's anger, and like what I'm learning is that generally underneath anger can be sadness or shame. Sometimes like a healthy expression of anger is that there's a boundary being crossed, that some structure or something needs to be torn down, and that needs to be expressed in a way. But yeah, when I was told like what I want doesn't matter, or maybe wasn't even told, was shown through actions, there was a lot of layers of sadness and shame. And so that got carried through my teenage years into my early adult years. And it's really maybe been the last couple of years that I've been establishing a relationship with the fact that like my voice matters. What I have to say is valuable. I have sovereignty. I have boundaries. I don't deserve to be treated in a way that's demeaning or disrespectful, and like finding my voice again. It's been wild. It's like the last few months I've just been singing so much. And I've also been able to like have more vulnerable conversations and to set more boundaries with certain people. And I just imagine how many people at an early age are just told that their voice doesn't matter in whatever way. And I've been able to just like realize that people have views or projections of how I should live. I've had people who are very close in my life, and it's usually the ones closest to us, who are like, you need to grow up. You need to get your shit together. Like, you need to figure out your career. And I was like maybe. You have a view of what being mature looks like, which is getting a solid job or getting a mortgage or doing something like that. I'm trying to figure out a life that's really meaningful to me and how to put the puzzle pieces together so that in 10 or 15 years, I'm not like loathing my existence. And maybe that takes a little more time. Maybe you just don't understand my path or my journey. So it's been a journey of like responding to people saying like what you want doesn't matter. I think like what I do want does definitely matter. As long as it's like, not coming from this childish place. Sometimes we want things and we can't get them, and that's okay. Or sometimes you go after something and you can't get it. And then you learn to deal with those emotions. You learn to deal with the sadness of not getting something, or, something being pulled away, asking for something from somebody and not getting it. I mean, like, okay, well, I wanted that, but that person doesn't want to give it to them. Like, they have sovereignty. And so now, as a mature human being, I have to be able to deal with my emotions and process those and not put those on anybody else. Or if I'm going to, like, be able to communicate those to people in a mature way, where it's not blaming, it's not looking at who's right. It's fundamentally looking at how do we learn together. So it's a bit of a longer answer, but that's
Yeah,
what I've got for you.
what I also got to, I mean, in your answer was this, that, like, we're responsible for our own self-expression. Like, even, like, us, both of us as an artist, like, who we show up in the world, and, like, what we create in the world, and also, like, all the, like, where we want to speak when creating that, right? Like, I got that, like, someone told me, yeah, like, you don't have an obligation for other people to listen to you or something, or, like, like, people are not obligated to listen to you, and you have to take that responsibility and elevate it if you really want to be heard. So I'm like,
Mhm.
wow, like, it's just like stepping out into being a creative artist, and stepping out and, like, creating that voice and creating who you are and creating who we are in everything that we do, right? So, yeah, and then it just really, like, like, your journey is, like, it's so beautiful. So, like, I'm not there yet, but, like, I can really see that I could totally relate, with what you said, and thanks for your answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And what I was saying is, like, I'm not there either. Like, it's a never ending path. You only find it by walking it. And I really appreciate your questions. Just like, I've got a big smile. My heart's really full. So thank you, Susanna.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Something I wanted to add to that conversation. I think intuitively I knew this topic was going to come up today. I don't know how, but I've been reading this book, 10x is Easier Than 2x by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. I'll be inviting them to be a part of this holiday hangout stream we're supposed to have in 2 weeks. I have no idea whether they're going to show up, but I'm going to throw a few Hail Marys and see who actually makes it out to have a conversation with us. But a big concept that Dan Sullivan teaches entrepreneurs especially is wanting what you want. And so often we're asked by people to describe and to explain to them why we need it or why we want it. So there has to be a because to almost satisfy either the curiosity or the animosity of people. Mm-hmm. But his suggestion is want what you want. And there's no need for justification. Assuming it's not harming yourself or others in any way, it's fine to want what you want. I want a record label. Do I know why? No. And that's fine. I just want what I want.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's what a lot of people get caught up is somebody asks them a question, they immediately feel like they've learned that they have to justify why they want something. And pretty simple, want what you want. That's beautiful, David.
Thank you. Susanna?
Yeah, I just wanted to share something else. Like, just recently, Breandan, I know that you're a Métis background, right? So, like, recently, I think in the last 6 months or so, I created like a like a movement that's called, like, I Am Possibility, and we actually did it in Squamish, and then we had, like, about, like, a few other people, like, about, like, maybe like 10 artists showcase their art in, like, like the in the elders community, and it's just standing for artists to be, like, possibilities in the world, and showing that possibilities of, like, being multicultural, being, like, together and connected. And it was so beautiful to showcase it to to show it to the First Nations communities and whatnot, and I'd like to in future invite you to one of those. Yeah, so it is just it's a movement that created, like, a lot of, like, like, standing in who we are and being possible in the world, and, like, as an artist create that.
Very cool.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm not trying to rush to the end in any way, but I think this is the segment of the show where I want to give everyone an opportunity to just chime in whatever capacity they want, especially Breandan. Do you have closing thoughts, final thoughts, anything that kind of feels like it's been left on the table in this conversation that we need to cover?
I'd just like to express I'm very, very grateful to be able to have this platform to speak and to connect with you guys. I've been taking kind of any opportunity I can just to be on camera and to share and to connect with others. And it means a lot. Just being able to build deeper connections and speak about meaningful topics. So thank you to all of you for taking the time to set up this platform, because I know it takes a lot of capacity and a lot of resources and a lot of effort.
I love the opportunity to share like this myself. I should probably give more interviews than I actually conduct, but nevertheless, it has been, I have been informed that it's a talent of mine, so I continue to do it. Jody, Susanna, anything you'd like to ask or chime in with?
I just wanted to say that, like, this is so great, Dave, that it actually is like a full, like, it's an outlet for me to be like fully self-expressed in the world. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for bringing in people and, like, having this conversation that people can relate to, and people can talk about what's important to them and be connected to great people like Breandan, right? And Jody and yourself.
Amazing. I love that. And that's what I love to hear. Jody, anything for you?
No, I just that's a similar aspect of life, is to be able to be self-expressed. I think that's one of my most kindred moments of spirit, is becoming that myself as well, and knowing who I am. I think I'm discovering that too throughout the years. So it's really a discovery of putting yourself out there, and then sometimes having a course correct or see where things go. And I mean, yes, it's how to be free in the world with so much confusion. I think it's I came up in a different era. So I mean, for me, it was how do I embrace technology in a world that's not as easygoing as it seemed like it was when I was a kid. So
it's a great topic, and we might even have to dig into it more. I want to acknowledge my Spark Infinity leaders for enduring technical glitches today too, because it's a live stream and you just never know what's going to happen. So thank you for being here and being part of this conversation. One thing I'll mention real quick, or a couple of things, head on over to our Facebook group. Breandan, we hope to see you in there as well. This is not my initiative. It's not Spark Infinity's initiative. We own this together. That's the only way we grow, is if we work together to have this happen. And that's how this live stream continues to grow and expand into new places. One other thing would be the Spark Infinity Inner Circle. This is where the conversations are happening behind the scenes. This is where private conversations happen in a private online forum. It's also a place for people to learn about how to grow their Instagram profiles, something that I've been surprisingly successful at this year. So if you want to learn what I've been up to and how I've been doing it, or if you just want to continue this conversation, at $9 a month, the Inner Circle is incredible value. And I would say the email series alone that you get over the course of several months is worth the price of admission. Susanna dropped off, but there she is.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's all from me. That's all from us. Thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for being here, Breandan. And we'll see you again next week.